To this webinar, asking for an education, health and care plan assessment. This is a co-produced event delivered by the Buckinghamshire SENDIAS service, which provides impartial and arm's length advice to parents and carers and children and young people, and is sponsored by FACT Bucks, Families and Carers Together in Bucks, which is the forum for parents and carers with children and young people with special educational needs or disabilities, working to ensure that the views of families are instrumental in shaping services. This is the first of a series of webinars we will be delivering over the next year, aimed at increasing parent and carer knowledge and abilities to engage with the SEND system. This webinar will be recorded. The slides with clickable links to useful websites and the recording will be shared with you in due course. These will also be available on the FactBucks website and the SENDIAS web pages, details of which will appear at the end. You will have noticed that you are automatically muted. Only the presenters will speak. Questions are encouraged. You will be able to type in your questions at any time, and we will try to answer as many as possible at the end of the session. Please keep questions as general as possible. Questions about individual children are best asked privately via the SENDIAS online contact form available on our web pages and I think in the link. Questions will be moderated before they appear, which may take a few minutes. We will collect together all the questions and share the answers with you as soon as we can after the session. So if we run out of time today, your question will still be answered. A tip: if you have any kind of connection difficulty as you join the session or during it, try logging out and starting again. If this does not clear up the problem, you will be able to access the recorded version of the webinar in due course. Today's webinar will be presented by my colleague Sarah Tibble, SENDIAS advisor, and myself, SENDIAS team leader. So we are going to take you through the process of asking for an assessment to see if your child requires an education, health and care plan. An education, health and care plan is a legal document that describes a child or young person's special educational, health and social care needs, explains the extra help that will be given to meet those needs, and how that help will support the child or young person to achieve what they want to in their life. We'll try to give you the law so that you know what your rights are and what to expect. Law slides look like this one with a dark blue panel on the left. We'll also try to give you tips to make sure your views are heard and to help you know what your options are if an assessment is not agreed. There will be links not just to general information, but also to information specific to Buckinghamshire. Just a note, where we mention parents, we mean parents and carers.
Good morning. So, what is an education, health and care needs assessment? It's an assessment used to make a decision about whether to issue an EHC plan. If assessment is agreed, the results of the assessment are used to make that plan. An EHC plan is a legal document. This means the local authority and health services have to provide the help in the plan, and the school, college or early years setting named on the plan must admit your child. We are going to start by looking at some important things to know about the law and then move on to the detail of how to make a request.
So it's important to know that EHC needs assessment is a legal process. This means that there are laws about when and how EHC needs assessments must be carried out. For example, an EHC needs assessment is set out in Section 36 of the Children and Families Act as an assessment of the educational, health and social care needs of a child or young person. Law trumps policy. Law is a must. Law takes precedence over guidance and policy. When we look at relevant law in a moment, you will see that law always uses the word must. This means it has to be done. Parliament has decided this. Whereas the SEND Code of Practice often also uses the word should. So where the code says something should be done, it means that although it is not a legal requirement to do this, it must be considered, and that bodies such as local authorities and schools are expected to explain any departure from it. An example from the SEND code is that schools should meet parents at least 3 times each year. When looking at local authority duties in relation to EHC needs assessments, we always go back to the law. You may also hear people talk about the Buckinghamshire policy for something. This means the local way of doing something, how we do this here, usually based on the law, but important to know that policies are not the law. So these are important examples of law and guidance for you to know about. The Children and Families Act was a new legal framework for SEN law introduced in 2014. The framework contains the legal rights to ensure that children and young people with a disability get the help they need. It is a very important law for children and families with SEN. The SEND Code of Practice 2015 that I've mentioned is guidance. It was brought out with the Children and Families Act. It is there to add more information about how the processes called for by the Children and Families Act should be put in place. A very important point to make is that as parents, you shouldn't just be told about the EHC needs process and the EHC plan. You should be fully involved in it and should be able to give your views and input throughout the process. The idea of co-production is that you are working with the local authority and other professionals as part of a team to get the best outcomes for your child or young person. So what does the law say about co-production? The underpinning principle of the Children and Families Act is that the local authority must have regard to the views and wishes of the child, the young person and their parents. So looking at these blue boxes, the local authority must have regard to the views, wishes and feelings of the child and their parent or the young person, the importance of them participating as fully as possible in decisions, the importance of them being provided with the information and support necessary to enable participation in those decisions, and the need to support them in order to facilitate the development of the child or young person and to help him or her achieve the best possible educational and other outcomes. We call the words in these blue boxes the Section 19 principles because they are from Section 19 of the Children and Families Act. The local authority must make sure that the children, young people and their parents and carers are involved in the decision-making process as fully as possible. So it's important to stress that this is not optional for the local authority, it is a duty. So what is a special educational need? Just because a child has a learning difficulty or a disability, it does not mean that they automatically have special educational needs. However, if a child has a learning difficulty or disability that requires special educational help, known as provision, to be made for them, then they are described as having special educational needs. It comes down to the help that they need. Put simply, if the child needs more support or different support compared to most other children because of a learning difficulty or disability, then it is regarded as special help or special provision. So what is a disability? Disability is a legal term as well. As we've said, a child may have special educational needs because they have a learning difficulty or a disability which requires special educational help. So we need to know what a disability is legally. So disability is a legal term, and the SEND Code of Practice uses the definition from the Equality Act 2010, which says you're disabled under the Equality Act 2010 if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. So this is the legal definition of disability used in the SEND Code of Practice, and it relates to the impact that your needs have on your everyday life.
So now let's look at the detail of getting an EHC needs assessment. As I mentioned, an EHC needs assessment is a required step towards obtaining an EHC plan. It's the process of gathering advice from everyone involved with the child or young person. The assessment focuses on three key things: the child or young person's needs, their outcomes, what it is hoped they will achieve, and the provision, help or support that they require. As this shows, there is no lower age limit for an EHC needs assessment. There's no requirement to be of compulsory school age, and also no requirement for the child or young person to be in education. Just because they're not attending a school does not mean you cannot make an EHC needs assessment request. So should I ask for an EHC needs assessment? Is your child not making progress despite everything the school has tried? Does your child need more support than the school can provide? If the answer is yes, then they may need an EHC needs assessment. One of the key things to consider when thinking about an EHC needs assessment is whether your child or young person is making progress. And you also need to think about whether they're making progress in all areas, not just academic. For instance, your child's main needs may be social and emotional. The other main thing to consider is whether the school have provided all the support they can. To help with this, at the end of the slideshow, we will provide information about what mainstream schools are expected to provide. So if we look at this example, a child's not making progress. The school feel they've put everything they can to support. It's agreed that more support is needed for the child to make progress. The school can't provide this support. They say they don't have the resources. So the next step would be to apply for an EHC needs assessment to secure that extra support. Without the extra support, the child will not make progress. So in this situation, the school either have additional resources to put in place and should do this, or if they don't have the resources, then an EHC request should be made.
So what does the law say? There is a legal test for an EHC needs assessment. The local authority must look at both of these questions: whether your child has or may have special educational needs, and whether they may need their special educational provision to be made through an EHC plan. The key thing to note here is the use of the word may. You do not have to prove that your child has special educational needs, just that they may have. You do not have to prove that your child needs an EHC plan, just that it may be necessary. In order to do this, you will need to demonstrate that they may need more support than the school can provide. For example, more specialist support, a higher level of support, or a different environment. In the case of older children, they also may need additional support with independent living and getting ready for work that is not available through mainstream provision. This quote from the SEND Code of Practice is also important to know about. Another question the local authority wants to be able to answer: has the school or setting taken relevant and purposeful action to identify, assess and meet the special educational needs of the child or young person, but even so, the child or young person has not made expected progress? It means that the local authority will look at what the school has put in place and what impact it has had. You will see that this gives more detail about what local authorities should do. But remember, it is not part of the legal test for an EHC needs assessment that we looked at just now, so it is not an essential requirement. Remember, law trumps code. However, it is much easier to get an assessment agreed if this kind of evidence is available. So there is a third test that the local authority must consider if the young person is over 18 years old. This is a really important legal point to be aware of if you have older children. The local authority must also consider whether the young person requires more time in comparison to others of the same age who don't have special educational needs to complete his or her educational training. This is especially important as from the age of 19, a learner with special educational needs in further education would be expected to pay for their course and additional help themselves unless they have an EHC plan.
So these are questions that come up very regularly for us. So point 1 relates to the fact that a diagnosis is not necessary for an EHC needs assessment. It's about the child or young person's individual needs. Point 2, which we've mentioned already, is that local authority will often look at SEN support and see what's been spent on the child's support. The figure they often look for is £6,000 because this is the nominal amount available per child under SEN support or low-level support. This is an individual local authority's policy and is not in the legal test. So there's no legal requirement for a certain amount of money to be spent before an EHC assessment can be requested. Point 3 is that just because a child is meeting expected levels for their age academically, this doesn't disqualify them from an EHC needs assessment. And the final point, point 4, relates to upcoming changes in the child or young person's life. An example of this would be if a child is moving to secondary school, and you know this will create higher levels of need for them. The local authority should take this into account. In the same way, the local authority should take into account the support that a young person may need in terms of preparing for adulthood, such as independent living, work support, communication skills, and travel. So this slide sets out some of the things the local authority will consider when deciding whether to carry out an EHC needs assessment. The Code of Practice Section 9 sets out guidance for local authorities. We've covered some of this and the importance of progress. If your child attends an early years setting, school or college, one of the things the local authority will ask to see is the child or young person's SEN support plan to see what support's been put in place and whether this has had an impact.
So, do your views count? The law says yes. So, in considering whether an EHC needs assessment is necessary, local authorities should pay particular attention to the views, wishes and feelings of the child and his or her parent or the young person. As we have mentioned, it is a duty for the local authority to take children and young people's and parents' wishes and views into account.
So who can make a request? It's not just schools or colleges who can make the request. Parents or the young person can make their own request. School leaving age is defined as the last Friday in June in the year your child will be 16 at the end of the summer holidays. So once your child is over this age, usually year 12 upwards, and has mental capacity, the expectation is that they would make the request themselves. But of course, you as parents can help them with this. There's one other way an EHC needs assessment may be triggered. This is when the local authority becomes responsible for a child or young person. This happens when they've been identified by the local authority as someone who may have SEN, or brought to the attention of the LA as someone who may have SEN. So this could be anyone, a friend, a neighbour, a concerned individual. However, they don't have any rights around the process once they've done this, and ideally it should be done in consultation with the family concerned.
So, how to apply for an EHC needs assessment? If you are a parent making the request, there is no standard form to use. However, it will help if when you send in your request, you also complete consent forms available on the Bucks Schools web. And you will find template letters there, and we also have template letters that you can use to help you to make your request. So you can see here at the top links to the relevant forms on Bucks Schools web. And below are the addresses of the hubs of the integrated SEND team, which looks after EHC needs assessments and plans. If your child attends a school in one of these areas, you can send your request to their hub. If not, or you are unsure, don't worry, just send it to one and they will forward it to the right one if necessary.
So how do you apply for an assessment? We would advise that your request is based on showing how your child or young person meets the legal test. And we're going to go through this in each section in more detail.
So just as a reminder, we need to look at the legal test for an EHC needs assessment, and we mentioned that we need to know what a special educational need is legally. So in order to provide evidence, we need to go back to the definition of a special educational need. And we need to go back to the definition of a disability. So we're making sure we're giving the right information.
So what types of special educational needs are there? As we mentioned, needs are not just related to academic achievement, and it's important you describe all of the difficulties that your child or young person has in any of these areas. So we have cognition and learning, communication, interaction, physical and sensory, emotional and mental health, and independence. Many children will have difficulties in every area, and it's often useful to use these categories as a guide to help you. If your child has a diagnosis, it is relevant to mention that. However, it's very important that you go on to explain the individual difficulties your child has and how this affects them, both in an educational setting and at home and in the community. Just because a child has a diagnosis, it doesn't mean that they will need an EHC needs assessment automatically. So if we look at this example, Conrad's difficulty here is stated at the top. It then goes on to explain how this affects him in different situations. It then goes on to say why this is a barrier for him. And finally, at the end, the impact of this difficulty on his life. This example hopefully shows the importance of explaining in detail the effect a particular difficulty has on the child or young person. And as you can see, the impact is not just on learning, but on many areas of Conrad's development. So his need to be able to make friends is just as important as his need to access learning. The second part of your request will focus on the support your child or young person currently has and why you feel it's not enough. You'll need to explain what support they've had, often called their special educational provision, and evidence that this support is not working. You could refer back to your child's difficulties and your concerns about their lack of progress. The final part of your request will be to explain why you feel your child may need an EHC plan. This means explaining what support you feel they need going forward and why they need this support. So what outcomes do you hope will be achieved? So in this example, the parent has identified that Amelia needs specialist autism teaching support. And the outcome for Amelia is that by the end of Key Stage 2, she will be able to use strategies to manage her emotions when unexpected situations occur. So this is just one example of an outcome and the corresponding provisional support. Most EHC requests will identify several outcomes and corresponding provision. So what about your child's views? It is really important to include your child's views in the request if you can. The slide above gives some examples of the kind of questions you might ask them. If your child isn't able to answer questions like this, you can mention their behaviour in different situations as an indication of what they like and dislike. For instance, if they behave more calmly or otherwise seem happier in certain situations, you could mention that. This slide relates to the evidence that you could submit with your request. So the evidence you submit doesn't have to be just formal assessments and reports. For instance, things like behaviour logs, attendance records, exclusion records can provide really good evidence that more support is needed for your child or young person. You can also include your observations. As a parent, you know your child best and see them in settings that schools don't. You might also want to include observations from leaders of clubs that your child attends, and this is especially useful if your child is homeschooled. So, you submit your request. What happens after that? The local authority will look at all the evidence and then they will make a decision whether to carry out an assessment. They must inform you within 6 weeks of your request being submitted.
So what happens if an assessment is refused? If the local authority decides not to assess, you have options. You could choose to wait and see how your child gets on. You could make another request at any time. You could choose to challenge the decision. You have the right to make an appeal to the SEND tribunal. SENDIAS can help you with this and advise you of your options at this point. IPSI provide a very useful pack to help you to know what to do. Before you register an appeal, you need to consider mediation with the local authority and will need a mediation certificate. So what happens if assessment is agreed? In regulations backing up the Children and Families Act, there is a list of people who the local authority must ask for advice as part of the assessment. This includes advice and information from any person a child's parents or young person reasonably requests that the local advice seek advice from. The local authority also has obligations to consider any information you provide, including private reports.
So what happens during assessment? Every piece of advice must include the 3 key things we've talked about, which is a needs, outcomes and provision. There's no set format for the HC needs assessment reports, but if a need is identified, the report must give corresponding provision to meet that need. And you should have a copy of all the assessments. So once the assessments have been completed, you could ask for a co-production meeting with the local authority. There's no specific duty on the local authority to provide this meeting, but to do so is in line with the principles that we've mentioned from Section 19 of the Children and Families Act and with the SEND Code of Practice, Section 9.
So again, what does the law say about co-production at this point in an assessment? The SEND Code says that you must be consulted throughout the process as your child involved as much as possible. EHC plans should be put together with you. Some of the ways the local authority can support the involvement of children, young people and their parents is by giving them time to prepare for discussions and meetings and making sure there is time in discussions and meetings to hear their views. Some children or young people may need support from an advocate who speaks for them to ensure their views are heard.
So an EHC needs assessment doesn't automatically lead to an EHC plan. By 16 weeks of your request, you should either be sent a draft EHC plan or be informed the local authority are not going to issue a plan. The local authority look at the information from the EHC needs assessment and decide whether it's necessary for special educational provision to be made in accordance with an EHC plan. Another way of thinking about this is that they have to decide whether the child or young person will get the support they need without an EHC plan. If the local authority decide to issue a plan, they must send you a copy of the draft EHC plan to check. It's important to note you have a right to a meeting with the local authority at this point. You then have 15 days to respond with anything you feel is missing or needs changing on the plan. A draft EHC plan doesn't name a school. At this point, with the draft plan, you have the right to request the education setting you want to be named on the EHC plan. We will do a webinar on choosing a school with an EHC plan in due course. The last part of the process is the issuing of the final plan, which should be done within 20 weeks of your original request. The final plan should name an education setting and is a legal document. Again, you have right of appeal at this point if you don't agree with the contents of the plan or the school named. So, what if you have questions during the process? To reiterate, the local authority should involve parents and young people, and it's your right to ask questions if you feel that anything hasn't been fully explained to you. This slide shows some further information on EHC needs assessments. There's some very useful information about assessments and EHC plans from IPSE, which is the independent provider of special education advice. We also have our own SENDIAS guide to EHC needs assessments. We mentioned earlier that when considering whether to carry out an EHC needs assessment, local authorities should look at what the school has provided and whether they've provided everything that they can under SEN support. So these links give some guidance as to what should be available in schools under SEN support.
We are nearing the end of the session. As I said at the beginning, we have aimed to explain the process of asking for an assessment to see if your child requires an education, health and care plan. I hope you now know more about what to expect. Please can you help us by giving us some feedback in the chat to let us know whether you have found the training useful. We will then follow up with contact details for SENDIAS and FactBucks. So, how to contact us? We are a free, confidential and impartial advice and support service for children and young people aged 0 to 25 and their parents and carers. If you want to contact us in the future, the easiest way to do this is via our contact form, which you can find on our web pages. If you want a quick response to a general inquiry, you could try our web chat service. We currently have 2 set sessions a week during term time. Alternatively, we do have a mailbox and a voicemail service. We aim to provide at least an initial response within 10 days. We have limited availability during the school holidays. You can find details for FactBucks on their website on this next slide. So they have an email address and a Facebook page where you can get in touch with them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we need to thank FactBucks for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and to Sarah also, Sarah Smith and Sarah Tibble for the fantastic presentation there. I can see a couple of questions have come through, so we do have a little bit of time to answer some questions. The first question is there guidance as to how long a SEN plan lasts for or how often it should be reviewed? Should the school manage this, or as a parent, am I responsible for monitoring this?
Okay, I'll try and answer that to start with. Well, for a SEN support plan, as I mentioned, I think I gave an example in the webinar that the school should meet with parents at least 3 times a year, and that was in the section in the SEND Code of Practice about SEN support plans and SEN support. So yes, you should expect a SEN support plan to be reviewed sort of almost termly, and it certainly should be triggered by the school. You shouldn't need to be chasing them to get that review and that SEND support plan in place.
Thank you very much. I hope that answers your question in the audience. We have another question from Andrew. He says, with a disability, how long is long term? Do you need to be born with the disability?
So no, you don't need to be. It's usually considered to be a year or more, the sort of length of time for having a disability, but there's certain exceptions. So some conditions automatically count as a disability, and other so there are some, there's some exceptions, and you can always make a case. So it's not that definition that I gave of disability is the legal definition, and it's open to interpretation.
Thank you very much. And Andrew, I hope that has answered your question. We have another question from Sharon. She says, good morning. Does higher needs block funding need to be assessed before applying for an EHC needs assessment?
No, that doesn't need that. So there's two separate things here. So sometimes if a child has needs that might be dealt with quite quickly by an input of funding, then it could be useful to ask for a school to ask for higher needs block funding. So that's something that a school can do, but it's not open for parents to do. And it's usually given when there's a short-term need for additional help, more than the school can manage from their own resources. Whereas if there's going to be a longer term requirement for support, the needs are going to be more prolonged and require probably some support over several years, then an EHC needs assessment is more relevant. You can find out more about higher needs block funding on the Buckinghamshire Schools website. There is some information about it there.
Perfect, thank you very much. I've got a question about IPSI. What does IPSI mean? I'm just wondering if you could provide a little bit more information on IPSI.
Okay, Sarah, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I will just go back here. So just finding my slide here, because it's on one of the slides that we just had previously. So on slide 46, we just mentioned that it's the independent provider of special education advice. So they've got a really good website, lots of information about the law and about parent rights. They've also got a helpline. So that, yes, they're a really good place to look for if you want to look for information to do with special educational needs and support for parents. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we've got just a couple more questions in the chat bar. So I've already had that one. So I've got another question from Sharon. She says she's found the webinar very helpful, so thank you for the good feedback. She says, I feel that with the question, is a child making progress? What if you dispute what the school says?
Well, I think one thing I would say is, obviously, if the schools say that the child's making progress, is obviously to ask for evidence of that progress. They should be able to demonstrate the evidence. So that's something that I would ask for. Yeah. Sarah, is there anything that you would?
Yes, I think I'd be asking for information. So it's comparing information from maybe a previous year to this year to be able to show, so that the school can show to you that the child has made progress. So, for example, if a child has a difficulty with reading, what is their reading age now, and what was it a year ago or so, and has there been some progress? So it's trying to find sort of baselines to identify where progress has been made.
Thank you. Got one more question here. Who actually makes the decision on the needs assessment request or need for plan? If the panel isn't legally required, can parents ask for a quicker decision from the position holder with that ability? Is that the area team manager or decision maker?
Okay, well, local authorities are allowed to use panels to make these kind of decisions. Unless there was an unusual situation, that's how they would normally make their decision, because on the whole, they're trying to make sure the decision is made as fairly as possible. So they try to have the right people around the table to make the decision and to look at the evidence in a sort of prepared way. So occasionally decisions would be made outside of panel, but no, it's my understanding that it's up to the local authority about how they make the decision. It's just that they have to make it.
Thank you. Got another question here. What is personal budget?
Yes, that's a thorny question. So a personal budget is it's a way of looking at the amount of money that is being used to provide the additional help for the child. So you can ask for a personal budget. That's not the same as asking for actual money. It's asking to sort of take control of the extra money that is allocated to the child for their special educational needs. So that's the money it's usually the money that the local authority would provide, having once you've got an EHC plan for your child. And yes, it is, unfortunately, it is rather a complicated process. There is information about it on particularly there's a website called Contact, so there's good information about personal budgets there. And Buckinghamshire is currently going through a review of their own personal budget policy and information for parents. So what I'm hoping is that it will be a lot easier for families to understand what's available to them in the future as a possible option. So it can be useful if your child needs something that's quite bespoke, that's not provided by the sort of generally commissioned services for, say for example for speech and language. Say your child needs something really quite unusual, then it can be useful to have a personal budget, ask for a personal budget, and sort of that can mean that then you can commission the specific speech and language help that the child requires, and sort of take a bit more control over that. Or in Buckinghamshire, it's particularly useful for families who've opted to families where unfortunately there isn't a school suitable for their child, and the local authority has agreed that that's the case, so the child is being is called educated otherwise than at school, and so then the family may want to take control of the budget then, so that they can organise what the help that the child requires in line with sort of family needs, because often that means the child will mostly be at home. So that's a little attempt to answer that question, but there's lots more to know about personal budgets.
Thank you very much for all that information. I just want to read out a couple of feedbacks that we've had in the question bar as well. So we've had someone say, thank you very much for the information. This session was extremely informative. I'd like to add that Tracy Campkin has been supporting me, and it's not often we get praised, but she's absolutely amazing and very efficient.
That's great to hear.
Also had some feedback from Stephanie. She says she's been very helpful as well, and it's made her feel more confident in applying for an EHC. Also, same from Emma as well. She said this webinar has been very useful. I feel a little more confident in applying now. I look forward to receiving the slides as a refresher for when the time comes. And we've also had a couple of questions asking when the next training is and what the next topics might be.
Okay, that's really lovely to have all that feedback. Thank you very much. I'm glad that that you found the sessions useful. Yes, so there will be further sessions in the autumn. So yes, look out on. So we'll send you information about those. There's going to be definitely one on annual reviews. There's going to be one on send support. As I mentioned, that we will try and do one on choosing a school, which is a very thorny area as well. So those are a few of the examples that we'll be doing. But yes, look out for news about them. If you want to sign up to our email news updates, then you'll be the first to hear about those. And you can do that via the online contact form that I mentioned at the beginning, that you can find on our website.
Perfect, thank you. We do have time for a couple more questions. We do have 5 more minutes, so if anyone does want to submit a question, now's the time, because we do have 5 more minutes, so we can actually answer a few more questions if needed. So yeah, we've just had some more feedback. Thank you, Colwinder. Thanks for the informative session. Thank you very much for attending. I'm glad you've found it really useful. We've also had a message from Andrew as well from FactBucks. He was supposed to join us, but unfortunately we had some technical issues. But he has been watching with us. So we also want to say a massive thank you to Andrew Howard and FactBucks for supporting the event and producing us with us. And hopefully we'll see him in the next one. Let's have a look what else we've got coming through. So we've got a question from Sue. She has said, is the form the best way to speak to SENDIAS? I've rung a couple of times and not had a call back.
Hello. Yes, the form is the best way. It helps us to help you because it means that we get all of your the details that we need, and we get the consents that we need to help you. Unfortunately, yes, we have been subject to delays recently. I'm hoping that we get into the autumn, we're going to be getting some more resources to help us, and we've got 4 new volunteers that I'm training at the moment who will be able to help as well. So yes, we're hoping that the situation will improve. So I do apologise for delays that people are experiencing at the moment, but we are endeavouring to get back to everybody as soon as possible. And you should certainly get at least an email with some information you know, fairly promptly after you've contacted us. So if you haven't had that, then please yes, please do try again. So when I say promptly, I mean within 5 working days.
Thank you, Sarah. I've got another question. Do you train schools?
Yes, we are often asked to do that. So yes, that's something that we're very willing to do, and we're involved with schools at the moment with certain projects with training. So one of the ones that we particularly want to offer is how to help schools and parents and young people to enable young people to get the most out of their EHC plan, and help young people to know what the purpose of it is and why it's so important for them, and how it will help them to get to where they want to be in their lives, and you know, as a really important sort of tool really, and with, you know, make sure they've got the right people around them, and that the outcomes in the plan are what they want, and where they, you know, to help them to get to where they want to be. So we've got some good training around that we're very keen to offer to schools in particular.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for just one more question. So we've got from Stephanie, is it best to apply for an EHC assessment now or wait until the start of the autumn term?
Well, that's a very good question. In many ways, it might be better to wait until September unless there's an urgent need. So if it's I think it would depend on whether you've got a child. If you've got a child with very pressing needs, maybe this child really ought to be. Maybe you've just moved into the area and your child has got a lot of needs, and they're really very likely going to need some specialist provision. Then I would suggest you put in a request straight away. If it's more that the child's been having SEND support at school over a number of terms, and you think that that you've been talking to the school and it looks like actually more support's going to be needed, then it might, and especially if you haven't started it already, because we'd always recommend that you do these requests in consultation with the school, because that will make your request stronger if the school supports it, or at least can provide you with some relevant information. There's an exception in the law around providing advice in the school holidays. So basically, the school, you wouldn't get if you applied now, you wouldn't get a decision in 6 weeks' time, because there's an exception in the school holidays for providing advice, because obviously schools are on holiday and they're being asked for advice as part of the request. So if you can wait, then I'd suggest you do at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I can just see there is actually just one more question, so we will make this one the last question. It says, does an EHCP in a PRU work in the same way, or is there a different process?
Would you like to answer that one, Sarah?
Well, it will be the same process, wouldn't it, Sarah? So yeah, absolutely the same process. Yeah. Sorry, that's a very short answer, but
that does answer the question. Thank you very much. So that is all we've got time for. That is all the questions. I hope everyone has enjoyed the event and found it really informative. The SENDAS team will be in touch with regards to the future events, and I think I'm assuming we'll be providing a presentation and also a recording to anyone who has missed the event or would like to watch it again. So thank you very much, everyone who's attended. Thank you very much for your questions and feedback, and enjoy the rest of your day.